morning, everyone. Welcome back after a week hiatus due to weather. I was talking to some of my old friends from Orlando about how, it was real cold. We had to cancel service. And I don't know if you saw this, but it got down to 30 degrees in Orlando last night. And so they were texting me, oh, Nick, it's 30 degrees. It's below freezing. But don't worry, we're not going to cancel service over some weather. And so they were giving me a hard time. But, yeah, so hopefully they'll see this. But, good morning and welcome back. I'm so pleased to be here, and I'm so pleased that the weather hasn't gotten in the way of us being able to meet together as a community today, even though, unfortunately, it did so last week. We are going to continue our study of Abraham, Father Abraham in the Old Testament. And if you know the story, God made a promise to Abram in Genesis 12. He makes a promise that he will make Abram a great nation, and he'll give him a great name, and that he would bless him. Through him, all the people of the world will be blessed. And Abram, for whatever reason, for all the good he does, for all the good influence he is, he seems to have a tough time trusting in this promise. So firstly, and we saw this 2 weeks ago in our lesson, firstly, a famine comes into the land of Canaan, the land God explicitly sent Abram to. And when he does this, when this happens, he flees to another country. Okay? And then later on, when someone implicitly threatens him because of their interest in his wife, he cowers and he pretends they're not married, and he makes his wife tell the leader, tell Pharaoh, tell him you're my sister so that I won't get caught in the crossfire. Okay, and then he does this twice in the matter of about 6 chapters in the book of Genesis. And so again, all of this, all of these behaviors that Abram has here are the incorrect response for him. If he would simply trust in God to make good on his promises, he would have no reason to fear, and most importantly, I think for us, he would have no reason to take matters into his own hands, and in doing so, put him or his wife's safety in jeopardy and gamble with the situation. Okay, so Abram fails repeatedly to trust in God's promises because, and this is the point, because given the circumstances, it doesn't seem like those promises are possible. It does not seem like even God can make good on that promise. And this leads directly to disaster and sin. And the point I want to make real quick before we even get into our text today is that the same is true in your life today. When you fail to be obedient to God, when you or I fail to trust in God, it inevitably always leads to disaster and sin, even when it doesn't seem like it at first. A failure to relate to God will always result in sin. And as Abram continues to learn to trust in God, we're going to go look at one more of his failures. For my money, his most famous failure in the Old Testament. So you can look at Genesis 16 is where we're going to start today. Now Sarah, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go and sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her." And so Abram agreed to what Sarah said. Okay, so just to recap real quick, Abram and Sarah have been promised a son. Not just one son, not just one child, but enough children to have enough descendants, as many as there is sand on the beach or stars in the sky. So they don't just need to have one child. They need to have a lot of children here in the future. But this is what they've been promised by God, and promised that it'll become a great nation. And just like before, Sarah's pretty old here. And I imagine, it doesn't tell us this explicitly, but I imagine they've been trying to have children for years, for a while. Well, God wants you to have children, Abram. He wants you to become a great nation. Maybe you should take my servant and have her bear your children for you. Okay, let's read on. So back one slide, I think. Yeah. So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarah, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar, gave her to her husband to be his wife. And he slept with Hagar, and she conceived. And when she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. And so Abraham, and I do want to point this detail out, he seems pretty easily convinced by this plan here of Sarah here. And so, suspiciously so. But he does exactly this. He sleeps with his slave Hagar, and it tells us that soon after Hagar becomes pregnant with his child, immediately there begins to be conflict between Hagar and Sarah. And consequently between Hagar and Abraham. And I know the temptation when we read this is to say, well, Sarah, how can you be mad? This was your idea. This was all your idea, Sarah. What's the problem? And husbands in here, husbands and fathers, I'm talking directly to you now. I know that really, really niche situation we're looking at here, but I just want to give you this piece of advice. If ever you find yourself in a situation, and I don't know why this would happen, but where your wife tells you it's okay for you to go and sleep with another woman, and you do so, yeah, Richard's already shaking his head like, nope, not tricking me. Yeah, if you should do so and that woman would become pregnant, seriously, just bear with me. And then that happened and your wife got mad, and your wife maybe even hated the other woman. I want to ask you this. Which one of you is being more unreasonable? You know, the person who went and slept with another woman and had a child with her, or the person who maybe went back on their word that they gave you initially, okay? And this is just my 2 cents here, but it's very easy to read this story and think, oh yeah, this is all Sarah's fault. It was her idea. It's all her fault. And I got it. No, I don't think that's the right way to read and understand God's word here. And not to beat a dead horse, but if God came to you in the manner in which he came to Abraham and told you, I'm going to give you a whole bunch of descendants, so many descendants you can't count. You're going to have more descendants than there is stars in the sky. And then you and your wife wanted to have children, and you couldn't do so. And maybe you tried to for years. At no point would it be on the table for you to go and sleep with another woman and have children with her. Even if someone close to the situation suggested this idea. For that to happen would be a lack of faith in God's promises, and it would be an act of taking matters into your own hands. And I know I'm kind of spinning my wheels talking about this maybe more than I need to, but this is the point I'm leading us to. This incident, in an obscure but a roundabout way, is the same situation as 2 weeks ago that Abram gets himself in. He does something sinful. He disobeys God. He takes matters into his own hands because God's promises don't seem possible. God promised something grandiose and hard to believe, and when things got tough, Abram stopped believing and took matters into his own hands. And now we got a whole mess that we have to deal with in the wake of that decision. Verse 5. Then Sarah said to Abram, "You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now that she knows she is pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me." And so obviously Sarah does bear some guilt in this situation, and she reminds Abram that he is part of this situation too. And this is a theme for Abram in his life. He is unwilling or perhaps unable to stand up for what God would want given these dire or moral situations. And he certainly fails to trust in God's promises. And I do want to be clear if I'm not. The correct response for Abram in this situation was to say, no, I don't need to go and take another wife. I don't need to be unfaithful. God has promised to make of me a great nation, and he will do so. Taking matters into my own hands, stepping outside of the bounds of a faithful covenant marriage is not what God would want me to do, and it is certainly not how God would accomplish his will in me. Verse 6 through 16, we got a longer reading here. "Your slave is in your hands," Abram said. "Do with her whatever you think best." And then Sarah mistreated Hagar, so she fled from her. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert, and it was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, slave of Sarah, where have you come from, and where are you going?" "I'm running away from my mistress Sarah," she answered. Then the angel of the Lord told her, "Go back to your mistress and submit to her." The angel added, "I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count." The angel of the Lord also said to her, "You are now pregnant, and you will give birth to a son, and you shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility towards all his brothers." She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her, "You are the God who sees me." For she said, "I have now seen the one who sees me." That is why the well is called Be'er Lahai Roi. It is still there between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son she had born. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. So, okay, a longer section for us to read here. But it is a good point in this narrative to stop and ask, I wonder how Hagar feels about all of this. I know Abram and Sarah seem to be at conflict, seem to be at odds, but I wonder how Hagar feels about this. Hagar is a slave who is forced to marry her master, forced to sleep with her master, and have a child with him. And upon doing so, upon becoming pregnant, her master's wife, Sarah, who is also described as her master here in this passage, abuses her to the point where she has to flee for her life into the wilderness. And it tells us here in Genesis 16, God comes to Hagar, God comes to her and encourages her. And she calls him the God who sees. Now, if you were paying close attention, you'll notice God doesn't really solve any of her problems here, does he? He doesn't really fix anything. She doesn't call him the God who solves all my problems. She calls him the God who sees, for I have seen the one who sees me. And if you're here today and you've never truly experienced affliction or suffering, that might seem completely bizarre to you. What are you so happy about? What are you celebrating, Hagar? He didn't even help you. What good has this done for you? If you're here and you've never truly been afflicted, this probably doesn't make sense to you. But if you're here and you have experienced suffering, or maybe are in the midst of suffering today, this seems really, really comforting, doesn't it? That God is a God who sees you in your suffering, in your affliction, in your ostracization, in your alienation from the world and from other humans. God sees you. So Hagar really is the victim in this account. And still God sees her affliction. And again, if you're here today, I want to gently remind you that God sees you in your affliction and in your suffering, whatever that affliction might be. Whether it's your family or your relationships are broken or at a time of conflict. Whether you're a parent in here and you're suffering. I mean, there's a lot of pressure nowadays on parents to raise their children a certain way or to a certain standard. Maybe more pressure now than ever before. Maybe you're here and you're afflicted by sickness or anxiety or guilt or shame or whatever it might be. I want to remind you that God sees your affliction. He understands what you're going through, and he sees you. And I think oftentimes we read this and we think of Hagar and certainly her son Ishmael as the bad guys in this account. And I think it's a good object lesson for us as Christians and for us as Americans, because oftentimes when someone doesn't look like us or practice our way of life or share our worldview or traditions, we immediately think of them in opposition. We immediately think of them as the bad guys. And I certainly understand this instinct. But the reality is, this is certainly not how Hagar is presented in this text. No, instead, she here is a vulnerable victim of someone else's sin. And God goes to her and comforts her and sees her. He doesn't solve her problems, I can tell you that. He sees her and acknowledges her. And if you're here today and you feel alienated or you feel isolated from the world around you, you feel like you don't matter because you don't fit into the institutions or systems of our world or our country or our way of life that surrounds you, if you feel like you've been unfairly mistreated because of these circumstances, this text reminds you that God sees you. Let's keep reading. Chapter 17, verses 1 through 8. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, I am God Almighty. Walk before me faithfully and be blameless. Then I will make my covenant between me and you and will greatly increase your numbers. Abram fell face down, and God said to him, As for me, this is my covenant with you. You will be the father of many nations. No longer will you be called Abram. Your name will be Abraham, for I have made you a father of many nations. I will make you very fruitful. I will make nations of you, and kings will come from you. I will establish my covenant as an everlasting covenant between me and you and your descendants after you for the generations to come, to be your God and the God of your descendants after you. The whole land of Canaan, where you now reside as a foreigner, I will give as an everlasting possession to you and your descendants. After you, I will be their God. And so this is 13 years later, if you were following the timeline. God comes to Abram again, and he reaffirms his covenant promise he made to him in chapter 12. And he reminds him of this promise, maybe because he needed to be reminded at this point in his life. I mean, it's been years, it's been decades, and he still hasn't given Abram a son. Let's look ahead to chapter 21 here. Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age at the very time God had promised him. Abraham gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him. When his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him as God commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Sarah said, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. And she added, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children, yet I have borne him a son in his old age. It takes years for God's promise to Abraham to even begin to take effect. Because if you read the original promise in chapter 12, really none of it can even start. The ball doesn't even start rolling until he has his first son here with Sarah, Isaac. I mean, he was 86 when he had Ishmael, and now he's 100 when he finally has Isaac. So the payoff for when Abraham does trust in God and is delivered a son is long and challenging. And there's a lot of ups and downs, but ultimately it is worth it. And I do just want to offer that the same is true for you. It is very, very easy for us now more than ever to become discontent with our life and decide that, well, God must not be doing anything for me. I should take matters into my own hand. I should make the life I want for myself rather than trusting in God. I should do it for myself because God's not doing anything for me. And you know, funny enough, for my money, fathers and parents are a really good analogy for this. You know, parents raise their children for 18 years. Nowadays, sometimes more than that, sometimes longer than that. But for 18 years, and for a lot of those years, isn't this true? It can be really hard. It could seem like your children aren't listening. It could seem like maybe they don't respect you, like they don't think you have anything valuable to say. All the wisdom and experience and patience you're trying to impart in your children, it's not landing. It's like it's not clicking to them, or that they don't care. But the truth is, and you'll see this, if you'll continue to remain faithful and trust in God and what is right, your children will come to know the Lord, and they will grow and they will mature emotionally and spiritually. And actually, this idea, I tease my dad about this a lot. I tell him, well, yeah, this is the reason I was so difficult when I was younger. As a teenager, Dad, I was trying to teach you an object lesson about faith in God. That's what it was. That's why I was so unruly. Abraham, for all the good he did, he often struggled with trusting in God's promises. And I think we've demonstrated that in the last 2 weeks here. And he often resorted to taking matters into his own hands and causing a mess for himself with all of the issues that come from that. And I hope that reflecting on Abraham's life and his mistakes and his triumphs reminds us of Jesus, who came to deliver God's promise of salvation, of resurrection, and of glory to us all. And his entire life, he never wavered from that for even a moment. And in fact, at Jesus' lowest point, where God's promise maybe seemed so far away, where he was about to be murdered on a cross, Jesus knelt down and spoke these words from Luke 22. Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done. Where Abraham tried to take control, Jesus surrendered. Where Abraham doubted in God's promises, Jesus trusted in them completely and entirely. He never took matters into his own hands. He didn't call 10,000 angels to destroy the world and set him free so that he didn't have to suffer and die on the cross. Rather, he did just that. He suffered and died for you and me. Christ shows us perfect faith, perfect trust in God, and perfect submission to his will. Let us as Christians learn to remain faithful to God and trust in his promises in the same way. If you're here today, the lesson is yours. If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate. Come now as we stand and sing.